Trump hitting dozens of countries with new tariffs. It's all happening this morning, and Eamon Javers joins us from Washington, D.C. With the latest. What's happening here?
Yeah, good morning, Andrew. Just a few hours before those 10% global tariffs expired overnight, the White House announced a new round of tariffs that will effectively replace those worldwide duties with a new set of tariffs. Now, these new tariffs are being imposed under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. This is
yeah, you heard that right. Trump saw the rising costs of goods in the U.S. and he said, fuck you to affordability, and that he's going to raise the tariffs that he had globally that were going to fall out of effect on Friday. He raised them to anywhere from the same, which is about 10%, up to 12.5%. The thing they haven't talked about in this is that on certain goods from Canada, they raised it up to 60% or more, basically making some goods impossible. Canada has already talked about tariffing the U.S. as part of a broader strategy for them to continue basically to retaliate in terms of a trade war with us. Just a quick update. So also when you're building housing, you need a lot of lumber, and a lot of our lumber comes from Canada. So to have these imposed and to start a war with Canada when they import a bunch of our lumber to build our housing that we have about a 6 million unit shortage of in the US is, it's insane. It's insane, and it's a very stupid move. But it is something that I guess I've come to expect from our president, because he's not the smartest cookie in the bunch. He is, in fact, a cookie in the bunch. All right, so let's look at what goods from Canada that they've actually imposed these higher tariffs on. And what it is motor vehicles, alcohol, and dairy. Obviously, Canada is looking to hit back. Continues. So, Canada's prepping for counter tariffs. They haven't actually done anything just yet. I think they're still discussing which items they want to tariff. They obviously import most of our lumber from Canada. The stuff that we don't get from within the U.S. is Canada or China, and now we're just exacerbating that tension essentially. By taxing these goods. We also get a lot of dairy from Canada as well. That's going to be super fun to get tariffed on. Well, people can't afford milk in the U.S. to begin with, because prices at the grocery store have raised about 30% since the war in Iran due to the lack of fuel that we're getting out of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, in the middle of this catastrophe where we can't do global trade because we don't have the essentially energy with oil, is also cutting off one of our major trade partners to the north, who could supplement some of our trade and potentially make prices cheaper at the grocery store. So the original tariffs, the 10 to 12% on every other country, is essentially a small escalation globally on the tariff war that he had been doing. And this is a large escalation on the tariff war with Canada, which I'm sure will bring reprisal from them that we'll see coming down the line. But oh yeah, so this was also after the Supreme Court ruled his initial tariffs unconstitutional, and that they couldn't get around it. So he found a new section in a law from the 1930s that he can use to impose these new tariffs.
The Trump administration has launched a fresh wave of tariffs, hitting 60 of America's biggest trading partners with new import duties ranging from 10% to 12.5%. The White House said the move targets countries that have failed to keep forced labor out of their supply chains. But critics argue the tariffs are less about human rights and more about reviving Trump's broader trade agenda.
They are not. Qatar uses slave labor, and Trump is fine working with Qatar all the goddamn time. The idea that this is about human rights and like slave labor essentially being used, when you impose it on Canada, Canada is not exactly against human rights and making sure that they're following fair labor laws. And they're the ones that are getting hit with like 60% tariffs on top of the 10% globals. So the idea that this is specifically within the bounds of this 1930 law talking about not working with people who use forced labor is just absurd. It's a way for him to get around the Supreme Court ruling that he didn't like. And that's it.
60 trading partners targeted new tariffs, 10 to 12.5%, covering 99.4% of U.S. imports. Under the new policy, countries that have made commitments to ban forced labor imports will face a 10% tariff. Those that have not will face the higher 12.5% rate. The measures replace the temporary universal.
So the only difference between whether or not you still get hit with the tariff, even if you have agreed to not use forced labor. That's the thing that's insane to me. How can you say it's part of this law to enforce not using forced labor even if you agree to not use forced labor and you show that you're doing that, you still get hit with a tariff? That makes no sense. The only difference is the 2.5%. We're speed running becoming not a global hegemony just as fast as we can by cutting off all of our trade partners in the middle of a war we started that has choked out the global reserve of oil. I think a lot of countries are going to be looking for another hegemon they can back besides the US as quick as they can. Unfortunately, it looks like China and Russia are the only two like potential contenders for that. But we're just like doing everything within our power to give them a great reason to not continue to be long-term allies with the US. They will be in the meantime because they still get a benefit from us currently being the hegemon. But I think they're looking for an escape route, basically. Especially with stuff like this continuing to go, they're just making it infeasible. Like if it don't make dollars, it don't make sense for trade with foreign countries. And at this point, they don't have a reason to stick with us as their main trading partner. They're going to probably try and open up more and more avenues with, guessing China, for larger global trade. And they're going to shift more of their markets so that instead of, let's say, 60% to the US and 40% to other places around the world, they're going to start looking at like, a 60-40 split the other way around and just slowly phase us out of their global trade as the tariffs are too high. And or they're just going to pass the cost directly onto the consumer, which is exactly what we saw during the last tariff war. So we're going to see even higher prices at the grocery store. So make sure to thank the Trump administration when you see your grocery bill go up by another, 5% this month.
10% tariff that expired this week. European Union, 10%, United Kingdom, 10%, India, 10%, China, 12.5%, Brazil, 12.5%, Japan, 12.5%, Australia, 12.5%. The White House said the tariffs are designed to combat forced labor and create a level playing field for American workers. But trade experts disagree.
This digital calendar, lightening my mental load, makes it worth every penny. I wasn't fully convinced the Skylight calendar.
So Friday, the Section 122, the 10% global tariff, goes away. Is the president going to ask Congress for an extension, or what's next?
Well, I know the USTR, our great Jameson Greer, trade representative, will be having an announcement on that very soon, later today. I don't want to get ahead of him, so I would just tell you to stay tuned for more details. Okay,
and then one more on the president's going to have some big utility companies at this event later on today. We're now a year and a half, so to speak, into his pro-energy policies. Is he going to pressure those executives to lower energy prices, not just maintain the prices?
Well, look, as I mentioned earlier, the Ratepayer Protection Pledge is a novel idea drawn up by this president, his team, to ensure that data centers in communities, where those communities want data centers, that these big CEOs and energy companies are picking up the tab for the energy costs in these communities. So the
Yeah, while we're talking about data center energy usage, speaking of global energy markets, the thing that they're talking about is a pledge that Trump sent out that's a signed piece of paper that basically says that the consumers in states where data centers are put up are not going to front the cost of energy. It is a pledge. It is in writing. It has nothing to do with the reality of it. It doesn't make any demands of data centers or local communities. It doesn't stop them from doing it. It's basically just, I pinky promise that I totally won't do that. And this is in, by the way, he only asked governors of Republican states. He didn't even ask Democratic governors to sign this. And on top of that, some of those states have already passed those costs onto consumers while they were building data centers out. Data centers that, by the way, contained NDAs for city council members and political people who would approve those data centers. So the people in those communities who had the power to approve that development were also signing NDAs with those companies that they couldn't talk about it publicly. That's insane. That's literally treason. You are taking a corporation and say, we're going to have this communication away from the voters that we'll never talk to them about, and we can't talk to them about it. And then I'm going to go to the public and say, yeah, we approved this permit. Why? Oh, I can't talk about that. There's an NDA. You know, and they're obviously getting a fat stack of cash. Part of the NDA, I'm sure, is them getting paid out directly as a bribe to put in these data centers. There's almost no doubt that this is the case. The only reason we don't have it confirmed is because they've all signed these NDAs and they're doing it in back rooms. But the fact that they aren't dealing in the public, and then these data centers that none of their constituents wants are going in, is I think a great sign that they're obviously being persuaded with something other than rhetoric and argument.
American taxpayer not being fronted with those bills. And the pledge today is being expanded to acknowledge all elements involved in building and operating data center, the governors who appoint the state regulators, who set the power prices, the utilities and the co-ops that sell the power, and in addition to the tech companies that have already signed the pledge. So you'll continue to hear more about that from the president in a few hours at 2:30 when he goes over to the EPA. Sophia.
Have you spoken to the president about what he wants to do about Chinese AI models if they are found to have stolen American IP? Does he want to sanction them? Or what actions can be taken without undermining broader U.S.-China trade talks or cutting off American startups that are increasingly reliant on them?
Sure. Well, I won't get ahead of the president on any potential actions, but obviously these conversations are taking place, and again, they're of the utmost importance, not just for our national security, but to ensure America remains dominant in this space.
Some argue the administration is using forced labor as a legal justification after the US Supreme Court struck down many of Trump's earlier global tariffs this year. Brazil called the new duties
As when they say some people are saying that, that literally is explicitly why he's doing it. His original tariffs got shut down, and so he's just circumventing them through a different law.
Unjustified. Japan expressed regret. Australia also condemned the move, while China rejected allegations of forced labor and accused Washington of using the issue for political purposes. Meanwhile, business groups warned the tariffs could increase costs.
Now, obviously, China is using forced labor. That's been proven multiple times. But that's not why they're being tariffed, because they're being tariffed in a group that is also not using forced labor. So if you put them in a bracket with 3 other countries that aren't also using forced labor, then it becomes very clear that that's not actually the point of this, which is the point of the law. So I imagine this would potentially get struck down again. The Supreme Court doesn't probably like getting circumvented, but we do have the most cucked Supreme Court that we've ever had. So I guess I wouldn't be surprised if they just allowed it to go through because they said you found a good enough loophole, basically. But that's all it would be, is just a loophole.
Costs for importers and consumers, while encouraging countries to deepen trade ties outside the United States.
Has anyone actually made...
I think that's a good place to stop here, but yeah, essentially they're going to find trade partners outside of the US to work with, and that's probably been happening already. They've been probably starting that process since we implemented the global tariffs in the most recent start of Trump's presidency back in 2024. But, this only gives them more reason to by showing that we're really going to stick to the tariffs long term. Oh, I forgot to mention. If you like this video, please leave a comment for me, subscribe, whatever you can do to help the channel. They're both free, and I very, very much appreciate it. I don't take a dime from any kind of advertisers. I do this for the love of the game, so anything you can do to help would be very much appreciated. Have a great day. I'll see you in the next vid.